Next, we have a very stimulating conversation on moral humility between the Dean of Harvard Business School, Nitin Nohria, and the District Governor nominee of District 3141, Rotarian Sandip Agarwalla.
Nitin Nohria is an Indian American academic and serves as the 10th and current Dean of Harvard Business School and the George F. Baker Professor of Administration. He's also a former non executive director of Tata Sons. During his 10 years at the Harvard Business School, Nitin has made a lot of changes. He focused on business ethics and made HBS more experimental and especially more global. He's one of today's most sophisticated corporate thinkers, not only in management and strategy, but also his intellectual interests center on human motivation, leadership, corporate transformation and accountability, and sustainable economic and human performance. Rotary is a global network of 1.2 million neighbors, friends, leaders, and problem solvers who see a world where people unite and take action to create lasting change across the globe, in our communities, and in ourselves. Solving real problems takes real commitment and vision. For more than 110 years, Rotary's People of Action have used their passion, energy, and intelligence to take action on sustainable projects. From literacy and peace to water and health, we're always working to better our world, and we stay committed to the end. In this quest, it is imperative to bring into its fold persons with a good moral compass, which is why Rotary chooses its members. Being engaged in the challenged sections of society, Rotary's work is a chorus of hope around the world. Watching societal discourse, one often experiences a longing for an authentic discussion of the core values that should be guiding us. It appears we are morally adrift. It is not that society is largely immoral, just amoral, lacking a clear compass or a foundational guide. Humility is that crest of human excellence between arrogance and lowliness. Moral humility is a matter of balance. Neither do people with moral humility believe they have low moral worth, nor do they see themselves as a moral authority. They see their own moral competence accurately. Morally humble people also appreciate the moral strength and behaviors of others. Moreover, they focus on moral learning, are willing to learn from others, ask for support, and admit their own mistakes. Leaders with this ability generally bring about less unethical behavior on the part of followers. We are fortunate to have amidst us today Dean Nitin Nohria and to have a conversation with him on moral humility. Nitin, thank you for joining us today.
Very, very warm introduction. Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be a part of this conversation. My father was a member of the Rotary Club in India and served as actually the chair of one of its chapters. So I have a long and very warm affection for the Rotary Club.
Thank you. I don't know if you're aware, but Rotary International's president, Herbert Taylor, introduced the four-way test in 1931. The four-way test of the things we think, say, or do is a test used by Rotarians worldwide for the last 88 years as a model code for personal and business relationships. The test can be applied to almost any aspect of life. So what is the four-way test? 1, is it the truth? 2, is it fair to all concerned? 3, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And lastly, will it be beneficial to all concerned? The four-way test is Rotary's lodestar. How relevant do you think it is today?
In some ways, it's extraordinary when you just hear that four-way test that if we were to apply it today, how much better the world would be. And, you think about the first test, is it true? People are describing that we live in a post-truth world. So just that idea that what we say should be true and we should be attached to the truth. Harvard's motto is Veritas, which is the permanent search for truth. So in some ways, there's such resonance between that core value that the Rotary has, its first test, and what we experience today. So at no time do I think is in fact that first test more relevant. Is it fair? Uh, just think about what COVID has again revealed to us, that so much of society is unfair, that the costs of any tragedy are borne by the most vulnerable in society far more than those of us who are privileged. So you and I can escape into the comfort of our homes and socially distance ourselves and take care of ourselves. But even in the United States, a rich country, there are people who are considered essential workers. The essential workers are often the poorest workers. They're the ones who are still coming, and for them to earn a livelihood means that they have to take the risk of getting COVID. So we are learning that in so many ways, if we were to ask ourselves the question again, is it fair? We would do a better job. Does it build goodwill? Right? We seem to be living in a world in which political opposition has turned into literally people not being able to have dinner conversations with each other. We now shudder at times to invite people of different political persuasions who are our dearest friends sometimes to dinner parties, because we worry that our friendship might be diminished by these divisions that we now experience in life. So to build relationships in which our goal is to promote goodwill is such an important thing. And the fourth test, which is in the end the most important test, which is it beneficial to everyone, right? Like, are we actually in the business of improving society? Are we in the interest of improving the welfare of this planet? And in some ways, I think that in that test, what Rotarians remind us is that while we're each individuals, we're also members of society. So if society as a whole suffers, in some ways we suffer too. So it is, of course, important that we be other oriented, but even if we just thought about enlightened self-interest, I think it is good for us to always ask the question, is what we're doing beneficial for others? So I think it's a fabulous four-way test. And if more people were to follow that test today, the world would be a better place.
I think the beauty of it is that it's timeless, and the way you explain it is really beautiful.
But it feels, it's timeless, but it feels more poignant today, right? So sometimes things that are timeless have a special resonance at a moment in time. And I, at least, as I hear that four-way test, it feels to me even more relevant today in some ways.
Now, whenever we see examples of ethical or moral failure, our knee-jerk reaction is to say, that was a bad person. We like to sort out the world into good people who have stable and enduringly strong positive characters, and bad people who have weak or frail characters. So why then do seemingly good people behave badly?
Look, this is one of the great moral questions that people have asked for a long, long time. And I came to think about this question very deeply through the work of a great social psychologist and moral philosopher by the name of Stanley Milgram, who was a professor at Yale. And in the aftermath of World War II, he was Jewish. He just couldn't understand how it could be that an entire nation of German people could have done what they did during the Holocaust to Jewish people. He says, is it possible that every one of these people was evil? Like, to believe that requires in some ways to lose your humanity too, right? To just believe that there could be a group of people where everyone was personally evil. So he conducted a set of experiments at Yale where he invited a group of people literally off the street, a randomly selected group of people, and they were put in a setting in which they were the instructor and there was someone else who was the learner. And if the learner made a mistake, they were supposed to give an electric shock to the learner to try and encourage them to do better the next time. And of course, what they didn't know was that the learner was a confederate of the experimenter and was not a real learner. They thought the real learner was just another person like that, because they would invite two people into the room. They'd have them draw a card, and one person would be put in the learner configuration and one person would be put in the teacher configuration. What they didn't know was the game was rigged so that the learner was always someone that was the person who was the experimenter. And the electric shocks would go up to volts that would kill the other person almost. Like the last measure on the electric shock was XXXXX. And at the simple instruction of a person who was standing in a lab coat who said the experiment requires you to continue, 2/3 of the people were willing to give a person who they thought was just their peer and had been by random choice assigned to the learner condition, a electric shock up to the level of XXX, just because there was a person who was in an authority position who stood there as the experimenter telling them, you are required by the experiment to continue. If the person said, but I'm feeling uncomfortable, all that the person would say is that you're required by the experiment to continue. If you stopped and you just said, I'm not going to do it, it's not like there was any handcuffs or any prisons or any penalty that you would get. So it puzzled Stanley Milgram, and it has puzzled me forever to say that 2/3 of people like you and I, could have been the people who ended up giving electric shocks to an innocent person just because someone in authority said that that was something that we needed to do. So that was the root of recognizing that we all have moral overconfidence. So when we show those experiments to our students at Harvard Business School in a class, and we tell them that, look, 2/3 was the result, and then we ask people to write down privately whether they thought that they would be in the 2/3. How many people do you think admit that they were going to be in the 2/3 who would pull the shock? Less than 10%. So we all somehow feel that, I would be that morally brave person who would have been able to stand up in that situation. And it's all these morally weak people who end up doing the bad things. I think it's really important to recognize that there are many, many societal influences that might cause us to behave in ways that belie our own moral values. It can be at times a person in authority. My boss told me to do this. We can justify things based upon what we think are societal norms. Bribery is common in India, the only way I can get things done, or in many other parts of the world. There's nothing wrong with this, everybody else does it too. So we justify behavior by saying that everybody else does it. It can be under the pressure of incentives. We saw this at Wells Fargo, that a company creates incentives for people to get bonuses based upon how many accounts they open. And it's a little surprise that many people decide that they need to open accounts. So it can be done under time pressure. People can sometimes feel like, I don't have time to get this done right, so I'm going to cut corners to do things in the short run. So there are many, many societal influences that we've learned over time that can cause us to be led astray from our core moral values. And that doesn't mean that we don't hold those values. It's just important for us to have the humility to know that there are times when under pressure, we may betray the values that we ourselves hold dear, and at other times may in fact follow.
Which actually leads me to the next question, is that with leadership and intellectual overconfidence, which you just mentioned, comes power. How does one disabuse this person so he doesn't suffer from moral overconfidence?
So I think the single most important thing, Lincoln, who was a much better, Abraham Lincoln, a very wise and extraordinary person, he led the United States through the Civil War, one of the truly darkest period in American history. And he was once asked during the Civil War, how do you test a person's character? And people say, does adversity show us what is the true character of a person? And Lincoln said, having lived through a period of great adversity, I actually think that people rise to adversity. They show the better side of their character in adversity. The real test of a person's character is to give them power. He said, I've seen so many people who were soldiers, but when they get promoted to sergeant, or from sergeant, they get promoted to general, something about that power gets into their head and their character ends up being now more challenged, and their morality, in fact, ends up being more suspect. So as a person who has taught leadership and is a part of an institution that is going to produce people who are very likely to gain more positions of power over time, I've been thinking about this a lot, which is what is it that we can do to enable people who become more powerful to sustain their moral humility? The only answer I've been able to come up with is, that old Indian answer of who you surround yourself with, this idea of sangat. is a very powerful idea. But it's not just who you surround yourself with, but do you create the conditions that they can call you on the mistakes that you make? Do you remain open to the people who are around you saying to you, I'm not sure that that is consistent with our values, or I'm not sure that you're being consistent with your own values? Having these truth speakers around you, because whenever you're in a situation like this, and we have seen this from literally every moral failure that we've seen from Enron and otherwise, there was a person who spoke up. There is never ever a situation that we have seen of a moral failure where the leader did not have someone close to them who spoke up and said, this is wrong. The question was that person listened to? Was that person someone whom you paid enough attention to? So we cannot in these moments easily believe that there will be something in us that will give ourselves the definite. You almost have to rely upon others. This is where teamwork and having people on your team who will call you out, but whom you trust, and when they call you out, you will listen to them. I think that in the end is the only systematic defense that I have seen of people who remain morally humble over time.
We are living through some very unusual times, and the recent crisis due to the pandemic has shown up a number of fragilities in many areas. Geopolitical tensions are increasing, economic and racial inequalities deepening, the revelations of working from home affecting many sectors badly, for example, jobs, real estate, the migrant workers in India at a totally loose end, and so on. I can go on. Do you think values and ethics have taken a hit, both from business and government?
I think they have been exposed. I think some of the failures in our values have been exposed more deeply at this time. And sometimes, at least maybe I'm an eternal optimist, my feeling is that when society is sometimes, its moral failures are revealed very sharply at a time in crisis. Those can often be the opportunities for recovery as well. So just take what was perhaps a little bit more uniquely American, but in some ways reflects issues I think exist everywhere in the world, which was the racial issues that came to full fore in the middle of COVID, right? We were already learning in COVID that the people who were affected by COVID were disproportionately from underrepresented minority communities in the United States. Then, of course, we had the killing of George Floyd that led to America really having to come to terms with the racial inequalities that are in this country. It was a very painful moment to have to confront this moral failure, that how is it the case that again and again and again and again, you find yourself in a position where innocent Black men and women are being killed by the police in circumstances that are horrifying. By the way, there was a great book written by an author called Caste, Isabel Wilkerson, that shows that, those of us from India should be very mindful that we have a similar system in India. And if you go all over the world, you'll actually find there's a caste system of some kind in every part of the world where there is an underrepresented minority. So I hope that this moment, which revealed how over time we almost learn to neglect these inequities in our society, or almost live with them, right? Like I certainly at this moment thought hard about how we experience poverty every day in India, but we just literally have become numb to it. We just say that, that's just the state of the country and there's not much that I can do about it. So I actually hope that this will be a moment in which the sharp way in which our moral shortcomings have been revealed will actually lead to a moral reawakening. I certainly see that on race in America. I sense a broader moral reawakening around that question here. And that gives me a little bit of hope that maybe this will be a moment in which, as they say, the darkest hour is the hour before sunrise. And maybe I'm just permanently optimistic in that way. But I do feel that this is a time which will hopefully cause us all to think that how do we make sure that this is not the world in which we live going forward?
Thanks once again, and all the best.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.